Welcome to Hidden Wounds. People think of bridges as a way to get from one place to another. For me, they became a place to disappear. The immense concrete beams above me would shudder and groan whenever a semi-truck thundered overhead, sending a fine shower of dust down onto my tattered blanket. That sound, however, became a strange comfort. Down here, nobody ever looks. Nobody has the courage. That was precisely why I chose it. At 62, my days should be spent with a glass of aged whiskey on a porch, my hand resting on the smooth mahogany rail of the home that was once mine. Instead, my companion in sleep is my dog Buster, and my only warmth comes from an old overcoat that carries the permanent stench of damp earth and mildew. Buster never utters a complaint. That's the thing about dogs. Their love is unconditional. A lesson my own son never seemed to grasp. It was just after sunset when I saw them the kind of brilliant piercing lights that only come from significant wealth. Xenon headlamps, deeply tinted windows, and an engine that didn't just run. It purred with the quiet confidence of a predator. Luxury SUVs don't pull over beneath bridges. They don't, unless they're either hopelessly lost or on the hunt. I went perfectly still. That's a survival instinct you acquire after living as an invisible man. You quickly learn that any movement is a risk. Even the sound of your own breathing can be a betrayal. Buster let out a low growl deep in his chest. Then, a car door opened. He emerged from the vehicle with a slow, deliberate grace, his tailored trousers looking utterly alien against the grime of the underpass, like a surgeon's scalpel slicing through decay. He had my late wife's jawline, that same determined set to it, but his eyes were all wrong. They were a cold, steely gray sharp, analytical, constantly searching. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the world, measured its worth, and decided what parts of it needed to be cut away. Leo, I whispered, the name escaping my lips before my mind could even process the thought. The young man's head snapped in my direction. He froze, just as a hunter does the moment he realizes his prey is aware of the stalk. He took a single step closer, his voice low and measured, as if he already knew the answer, but needed to hear the confirmation from me. Grandfather. The word cut through me, as sharp and precise as a shard of glass. I hadn't heard it spoken in years. According to my son, Vincent, I was dead and buried. My ashes had been scattered. The appropriate tears had been shed. And yet, there I was, shivering under a bridge, very much alive, while my own flesh and blood accepted the fiction of my grave. I forced my back to straighten, gathering what was left of my dignity around me like a threadbare cloak. Yes, I said, my voice devoid of relief or joy. It held only the cold, hard certainty of a secret that can no longer be kept. He moved closer still, and the expensive fragrance of his cologne sliced through the foul, urine-stained air. He glanced down at Buster, who huddled closer to me, the outline of his ribs starkly visible beneath his matted fur. What in the hell is this? His voice was a cocktail of disbelief and something more potent. Perhaps it was anger. My father said, "Your father lies," I interrupted. My tone was like ice brittle, sharp and clean. I would not allow myself to tremble. I would not offer an explanation. He always has. Leo blinked, as if the unvarnished truth had been lurking just behind his eyelids, and now, finally, it had clawed its way into the light. He looked at me again, truly looked at me this time. The prominent cheekbones he'd only seen in oil paintings, the stubborn streaks of silver in my hair that I always refused to color, the faint scar on my left wrist from a fall I took as a boy. You can erase a man from legal documents, but the body keeps its own record. "Get in the car," he said at last. It wasn't a request. It was a command. I offered no argument. I tucked Buster under one arm, gathered my meager possessions, a worn satchel with a cracked leather handle, and walked toward the SUV as if I still belonged in such vehicles. Leo opened the passenger door for me, and in that fleeting moment, I saw a glimpse of the boy he might have been, the grandson I was never allowed to know. Inside, the supple leather seats enveloped me. The heater blasted a wave of warmth that felt almost searing against my frozen skin. Buster curled up against my leg. I let my fingers idly trace the intricate stitching on the seat, not out of admiration, but as a deliberate act of remembering what had been violently ripped away from me. Leo slid into the driver's seat and gave me a sideways glance. "Do you understand what this means?" "Yes," I stated flatly. "It means the lies are starting to come apart." He didn't push for more. He simply drove, the engine a deep hum, like a contented beast. I watched the city lights blur past my window, each one a painful reminder of the life from which I had been surgically removed. Every towering skyscraper, every brilliant billboard my name should have still held weight in this town. Instead, Vincent had methodically erased it. Buster's head rested on my lap. I stroked his ears, my mind calm and calculating. Leo's hands gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched with a storm of thoughts I couldn't yet decipher. Finally, he broke the silence. "He told me you were dead, that you died before I was even a teenager. There was a funeral, an urn. Photographs can be faked," I said. "All of it? Why?" The edges of his voice frayed, but his eyes remained hard as flint. I turned my head to look out the window. My reflection showed him exactly what I wanted him to see. A man scarred but not shattered. A man stripped of all possessions but not begging for an ounce of pity. "Because," I whispered, letting the words hang in the air between us like a loaded pistol, "your father wanted more than his fair share." He guided the car through a set of imposing gates into a private driveway, the kind that hummed with the unseen vigilance of security cameras and silent alarms. The gates swung open for us without the slightest hesitation. I raised a single eyebrow. "Your house?" "No," he said, his lips twisting into something that was part smirk, part snarl. "Yours?" The SUV came to a stop before a mansion. Not just any mansion, my mansion. The grand columns, the formidable stone facade, the carved initials above the entrance that my wife and I had commissioned decades ago. Only the gardens had been altered, meticulously manicured to suit someone else's taste. I stepped out of the vehicle slowly, with Buster close at my side. My feet on the gravel felt like I was walking on brittle bones. Every window in the house gleamed with light, but none of them offered any recognition. Inside, the walls were adorned with portraits my face, but subtly changed, softened, the edges blurred. The lines around my eyes had been airbrushed into oblivion. My prized art collection was gone, replaced with gaudy pieces Vincent must have selected. It was like staring at a ghost painted by a counterfeiter. I let out a single, sharp, humorless laugh. He even stole my wrinkles. Leo followed me in, his eyes tracking every flicker of emotion on my face. "You should know," he said quietly. "This isn't just about the property. There's more." I turned to face him. "Tell me." He took a deep breath, his shoulders tense, as if he were carrying the weight of a secret that had been slowly eating him alive. "He didn't just fake your death. He rerouted everything. Every dollar, every trust fund, every single asset was moved into his name. He used your forged death certificate to seize control of the foundation, the estate, all the accounts. He made himself into you." I finished for him. "Yes." I nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. The anger was there, burning white-hot deep inside me, but I refuse to let it show. Anger is just noise. Revenge is silence. Good, I said at last. Then I know exactly what I'm taking back. The massive front doors opened with the same familiar groan, as if the old hinges still remembered the touch of my hands. Inside, the heat in the foyer was palpable, like a breath held for far too long. My face stared back at me from every gilded frame. My bone structure, the angle of my jaw, but all of it softened, as if a stranger had smoothed away my sharp edges. Even the artist's signature had been replaced with a brand, the kind that flatters those who are terrified of time. Careful, I said to Buster as he trotted across the marble floor to sniff at the base of a Corinthian column. They worship surfaces in this place. Leo locked the door behind us and keyed a code into a control panel I'd had installed 20 years ago, long before everything became touchscreen and condescending. The panel chirped obediently. The alarm systems receded into the walls like reptiles slithering back into the mud. He knew the codes. That detail intrigued me. He seemed comfortable in this environment, which suggested he'd been here before, unannounced. Good. A grandson who snoops is far more valuable than a son who blindly obeys. Kitchen? He asked, gesturing toward the south wing. The study, I corrected, and not the one your father uses to parade his donors through. My wife's study. He nodded, as if he'd already catalogued the house's various psychological territories. The room for public appearances, the room for private sins, the room where money was taught to multiply. He led the way but kept glancing back, seeking my approval of his chosen route. I remained expressionless. Approval is a currency you only spend during a famine. The study was unchanged. It couldn't be. A room that is used for deep thought develops a gravity of its own. The walnut bookshelves sagged under the ancient weight of legal tomes and financial ledgers, and the leather armchairs possessed that particular sheen that comes only from years of patience, not from polish. I walked over to the desk and laid my palm flat upon its surface, my fingers searching for the tiny, hairline crack near the right corner where the wood grain split. There it was, a splinter as small as a forgotten memory, but twice as sharp. Proof that age always wins the battle against varnish. Leo switched on a banker's lamp. A green shade cast a warm cone of light onto the desk. He reached into his jacket and placed a sleek phone on the blotter between us. It was a private model, not the kind of device young men use for selfies. He then produced a second device, a slim black rectangle that looked like a deck of cards. He didn't need to explain what it was. Its form betrayed its function. A secure hard drive, hardware encryption, the kind of tool men use when their very lives depend on silence. I don't bring paper into houses I don't own, he said. This will be enough. He booted the drive. A logo I didn't recognize materialized on the phone screen, a discreet consultancy, undoubtedly. A long list of files populated the screen, scrolling on and on. PDFs, JPG scans, XMLs, the true lexicon of theft. Names leaped out at me like bared teeth. Wilder and Keene, LLP. The Hart Family Foundation. The State of California Department of Public Health. The Office of Vital Records. That last one made my pulse flutter in my wrist, the way a healing cut tingles with the sharp return of blood flow. Start with the death certificate, I commanded. He tapped the screen. The document filled the display, and for a brief second, the room seemed to tilt ever so slightly, the way it does when you stand up too quickly after feigning sleep for too long. There it was. My name, my date of birth, and my supposed date of death. The cause. Cardiopulmonary arrest. Neat. Clinical. The kindest of lies which are always the cruelest. The field for the attending physician was filled with a name I'd never seen before, Dr. Lawrence Lehman, and a signature that slashed diagonally across the page with the swagger of a man accustomed to having the final word. The certifying official's signature had a different, more elaborate flourish. The paper trail was meticulous, including a cremation permit, a receipt for an urn, and a form authorizing the release of my supposed remains to a private cemetery I had always despised. It was all there, clean and complete, as if I'd had the decency to die without making a fuss. "See the timestamp," Leo said, zooming in on the detail. "Filed at 9:17 a.m., 2 days after you supposedly passed. The clinic listed here isn't even equipped to pronounce a death. It's one of those wellness spas for drips, hydration therapy, that kind of nonsense," he added. "I spoke to a nurse who remembered a rush job for a high-profile family. The rush job being my funeral," I said. "And the high-profile family being your father's insatiable appetite." He swiped to the next file. It was my signature on an electronic document, granting power of attorney to Vincent 3 months before my alleged death. The shape of the letters was mine. I had taught my own hand to form that exact script, but I could see a subtle hesitation between Arthur and Hart, a pause I never make when signing my own name. Whoever forged it had mastered the flourish but missed the rhythm. I remember the day I taught Vincent how to tie a Windsor knot, telling him that true style never needs flashy decoration because it is a statement of presence in itself. I remembered the way his small hands fumbled with the silk, greedy for the symbols of adulthood without comprehending the responsibilities they carried. I allowed the memory to pass through me, like a tourist in a museum who glances at an exhibit and moves on. "He used this POA to access the trust?" I asked. "Yes. Wilder and Keene drafted a contingency succession plan for the Hart Family Foundation and the Marital Trust, all under the assumption that your death was imminent. The board was then reconstituted with as proxies 3 men who had no standing other than their proximity to your son." He pulled up a diagram of boxes and lines, a simplistic representation of a scheme that had no regard for souls. The trust my wife and I had established decades ago was structured to pass to me, and then to the issue of the marriage. The language was specific, old-fashioned, and precise, intentionally designed to shut out opportunists. Somehow, those sturdy doors had been removed and replaced with revolving glass. The foundation became the primary vehicle, Leo explained, tracing the lines on the screen with his finger. From there, funds were dispersed to a donor-advised fund, then paid out as consulting fees to a third-party management entity, Hart Meridian Partners, which was, coincidentally, incorporated the week after your death certificate was filed. "Coincidentally," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Coincidences like that were your father's specialty." I took the phone from his hand. The next file contained a series of photos, the mansion's deed transfer, property tax forms, and declarations of charitable use for certain rooms, allowing him to deduct the cost of his own self-aggrandizing portraits under the guise of philanthropy. There was a photograph of the grand entryway, my entryway, with a ceremonial ribbon stretched across the doorway, and the mayor beaming next to a plaque that bore my name, but offered thanks to Vincent. The mayor likely would have preferred new money, but he'd make do with old money, provided it behaved like a mirror. "Keep going," I urged. He paused at the next folder. That small hesitation told me it was about a person. "My mother," he said quietly. I gave a single nod, bracing for the knife. He opened a scanned memo from a private investigator. Subject: Inquiries from Clara Reed. I read the summary. Leo's mother had started asking questions about 6 months after my supposed death, when a quarterly distribution to the family holding company failed to arrive on schedule. She had emailed a partner at Wilder & Keene, CCing a tax attorney at an outside firm. Her tone was polite. She made no accusations. She simply requested an accounting consistent with the estate plan she believed was still in effect. The next page detailed a meeting that was never recorded on any official calendar, a clandestine conversation between the law partner and a man identified only by his initials. Then, a handwritten note in the investigator's scrawl in the margin. Boat night noon. A grainy photograph showed a marina. Another showed a life vest, half inflated, drifting on the water like a lie that had forgotten its purpose. She drowned, Leo said, his voice flat, like metal that has been hammered for too long. They called it a tragic accident during a solo night cruise. But she never went out on the water at night. She was a morning person. She hated the dark water. And your father? He cried like his soul had been ripped out. And then, the week of her funeral, he filed new board resolutions. He pinched the bridge of his nose and looked down, a gesture that held none of the innocence of a boy. I started digging after that. At first, I just needed to know she hadn't done something reckless. But then I saw that the numbers were wrong in a way that felt deliberate. Deliberate. The word pleased me, though not for the usual reasons. To uncover a design is the first step toward its demolition. Show me his face, I said. He looked puzzled. In here, I explained, tapping the phone. Greed has a face. I want to see it. He opened a series of email chains. Vincent's voice was there, translated into the digital effusiveness of a man who believes his charm can reshape reality. Can we accelerate the DA fund transfer? Need to close on the Montecito property by EOM. Another was an outreach to a media contact. Remind them, the foundation is my father's legacy. We're honoring his wishes. May he rest. May he rest, I repeated, savoring the way the words turned to ash on my tongue. How pious. He scrolled on. One email had an attachment labeled Eulogies, Final PDF. I refused to let him open it. There are limits to indecency, even for me, and I have no stomach for counterfeit grief. We sat in silence for so long that the banker's lamp began to hum. When I finally tore my eyes from the screen, I realized Leo hadn't been looking at the files at all. He had been watching me, measuring me. He learned that from his father. What he hadn't learned was the strategic advantage of being underestimated. He overanalyzes people. I would teach him economy. You're remarkably calm, he observed. The dead don't panic, I said, setting the phone down. And I've been dead on paper for years. It's excellent training for a resurrection. His mouth twitched again, his version of a smile. Do you want to discuss next steps? Not yet. I stood up, and the old leather chair groaned in the same complaining tone it used to when my wife worked late into the night, reading legal briefs. First, I want to take an inventory of what he thinks is untouchable. We walked through the house. Buster followed, his nails clicking on the tile with a clean, sharp sound that exposed the plush carpets as a lie. The dining room was the most offensive. It was some decorator's overwrought vision of grandeur, with vases as tall as men meant to distract from the fact that any meal eaten there would be steeped in a dialect of hollow charity. Vincent had hung a massive mirror, where my wife and I used to hang antique maps. The mirror was a more suitable landscape for him. In the breakfast nook, a sliver of moonlight illuminated a faint stain on the stone countertop, where I used to roll out pastry dough at 4 a.m. You can judge a home by where its stains reside. I pressed my finger to the spot and felt the familiar grit. Buster sneezed. A room for you is upstairs, Leo said. West Wing. He's in Montecito tonight for a donor dinner. He watched my face, looking for any sign of offense at the word room, and when he found none, he added, "Temporary. The goal is to be in motion, not to unpack," I said. "Correct. I'm not here to nest. I'm here to count." He showed me to the guest suite he had prepared. It was set up not for comfort, but for war. Crisp white linens, stark white walls, and a wardrobe filled with neutral-colored clothing in my size. I raised an eyebrow. "You guessed my measurements." "I asked a tailor who knows how to keep his mouth shut," he replied, "and a barber who doesn't." I opened the wardrobe, ran my hand along the smooth silk of a shirt with the finest pinstripe, and then closed it. "These will suffice when it's time to be seen." He lifted a small suitcase onto the bed. "I bought the toiletries you prefer." He said it like an apology he didn't want me to mistake for weakness. Buster leaped onto the bed and turned in a circle, the way creatures who remember softness do when they decide to forgive the world for a few hours. I should have ordered him down. I didn't. A king can grant clemency. It costs nothing and serves to confuse the guilty. "Leo?" I asked. "Scotch," I said. He returned with a crystal decanter and 2 small tumblers, though I noted he only poured a drink for one of us. He had his mother's restraint when it came to poison. I took a mouthful and let the liquid heat bloom down my throat, the warmth tripping all the old alarms on its way down. For a moment, I allowed my eyes to close. The sound from beyond the windows was the same as it had always been, the trees asking the wind to choose a side. "Why now?" I asked without looking at him. "What made you pull over under that bridge tonight?" He took longer to answer than men usually do, which meant the answer would be worth hearing. "I found a ledger," he said. "Not in a bank, in a man's pocket." "The man with the initials," I surmised. He nodded. "He fell out of favor with my father. When people fall out of favor with him, they tend to lose the parts of their faces that look human." He was trying to sell himself some insurance before the eraser went all the way. I paid for a page. The ledger wasn't detailed, but it was enough. The entry for the night my daughter-in-law died used a particular phrase, a phrase they wouldn't use if it had truly been an accident. Which phrase? He looked at me as if speaking the words aloud would brand him forever. "Problem solved." We let the words sit on the white duvet like a drop of blood on fresh snow. There were no tears, no overt fury, just the cold addition of numbers to a column that already contained my own death and the wholesale looting of my family's future. "What do you want from me, Leo?" I asked. "Clarity? Permission? A weapon?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and folding his hands. It wasn't a posture of prayer, but something akin to it. "I want your name to mean what it was always meant to mean," he said, "and I want him to lose everything he believes is permanent." "We are in agreement," I said. We returned to the study downstairs. He pulled up more files. I committed the details to memory. Paper leaves a trail, and I had no intention of leaving anything behind until I was ready to publish the map. We began to outline the initial contours of a sequence that would not look like a strategy to anyone who still believed in apologies. "Step 1, he said, "we need to establish your legal existence." "A resurrection," I mused. "The court clerks will enjoy the theology. I can arrange for biometrics, a witness statement, and a court order to unseal the records," he said quietly. "But there's a risk. The more moves we make, the more he'll notice." "Good," I said. "I want him to feel the air change." He swiped to a contact screen on his phone. Lawyers, private investigators, a notary whose name I recognized from a luncheon where ambition drank too much water and called itself caution. "You'll need to sign an affidavit," he said. "I will not sign anything drafted by Wilder and Keene or any of their associates," I stated firmly. "We'll use your counsel for the mechanics, not for their judgment. The judgment is mine." He inclined his head. Understood. We discussed timelines, not dates. Dates are brittle. They snap under pressure. Timelines, however, can flex and refuse to be surprised. As we worked, the house seemed to settle around us, as if trying to decide whether to embrace my return or spit me out. Houses always pick sides. I kept my voice low, but even so, the walls would remember the sound of authority. When the mantel clock struck midnight, I rose. Buster awoke, leaped down from the sofa where he had been feigning sleep, and gave himself a thorough shake. The sound was small but absolute. "There's a guest room," Leo offered again, not because he thought I hadn't heard him, but because men believe in the ritual of offering a bed as if it constitutes hospitality. It does not. Shelter is not kindness when you have stolen the roof. "I will rest," I said. Resting is not the same as sleeping. Do not confuse the two. He gathered his devices, slipping the phone back into his pocket and the black drive into an inner compartment of his jacket. He was careful with the drive, the way boys are careful with knives when they first learn they cut both ways. In the corridor, we passed one of the altered portraits of me. The forger had softened my eyes into something resembling mercy. I stopped and cocked my head. "He paid someone to take the edge off of me," I said. "That's a confession in pigment." "I can find the painter's name," Leo offered. "Later," I said. "We will restore what can be restored, and we will destroy what cannot." At the threshold of the West Wing, he turned. "I have one question." "Only one?" I said. "You disappoint me." He let the comment pass. "Do you want your name back?" he asked softly. "Or do you want him gone?" The question was clean, not because it was simple, but because it drew a line across a map that no one else had the courage to draw. He needed to know. People want to believe in proportionality. It makes them feel safe. But proportionality is a myth we tell children so they won't grow up to be cruel. I was not a child, and cruelty has its uses when it is precise. "Both," I said. I held his gaze until he understood there would be no negotiation on that point. Then I closed the door to the suite, untied my old coat, and hung it in a wardrobe that was not mine, but was obedient in the way that expensive objects are. Buster jumped onto the bed again, looking at me with a kind of trust I have never seen in a human eye. I allowed it to stand. One night on fine cotton for a creature who has never taken a single thing from me is not a weakness. It is a decree. I washed my hands in the marble basin, dried them on linen towels too stiff to be honest, and stared at my face in the mirror above the sink. The house's pristine lighting cast a white band across my forehead. The shadows created parentheses around my mouth. I lifted my hair and pinned it away from my neck. The bones there are straight and narrow, the way my wife used to describe rivers on a survey map, full of promise, until someone dams them. I lay down on the bed without taking off my shoes. There is a ritual to returning to a place that has pretended to forget you. You do not surrender to its softness. You make it work for you. The ceiling above me was smooth plaster. I knew precisely where the hairline crack would run, from the chandelier's medallion toward the window. It always did after the winter storms. I closed my eyes and traced the crack's probable course in my mind, the way generals trace campaign routes on a relief map. Sleep came in strict, disciplined slices. In the moments between, I listened to the house breathe. Sometime before dawn, I awoke with the unshakable certainty that not all the ghosts in this house were mine. I rose and padded barefoot into the hallway. There are sounds that old wood makes the tick of expansion, the sigh of weight settling. And then there are the sounds a photograph makes when a draft lifts its corner. I followed that faint whisper to the small sitting room at the end of the hall, where Vincent used to pretend to read. The lamps were off. The window was cracked open just enough to allow a thread of cool air to enter. On the wall above the fireplace hung a portrait I hadn't noticed before. It was not of me, nor of my wife. It was of Vincent. The artist had caught him when he wasn't posing, which is to say, he had caught his truth. Ambition makes an aperture of the eyes. If you look closely enough, you can see what it intends to swallow. I reached up and straightened the frame. It had been tilted, but not by accident. People tilt things to make them look more alive. I prefer them square. Back in the bedroom, Buster grumbled in his sleep and rolled onto his back, surrendering to a dream uncomplicated by property law. I knelt and scratched his chest until his paws twitched. "We will be precise," I told him. "Precision is the only mercy we offer ourselves." At first light, I showered, dressed in a cream-colored shirt and a jacket, the color of contempt, and combed my hair into a style that has never lost an argument. Leo was already downstairs, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, like men in catalogs who want you to believe they've been hard at work since before you awoke. He had brewed coffee, but had left a cup for me untouched, as if choosing my first sip on my first morning back would be an insult to the final shred of sovereignty I possessed. "Wise. We start today," he said. "We started the moment you said, 'Grandfather,'" I corrected. "Today, we escalate." He slid a thin folder across the kitchen island. "Not a hard drive, not a phone. Paper." I raised an eyebrow. "Copies," he clarified. "You said no paper until we publish. This paper is meant to be found by the right person at the right moment." I opened it. Inside was a notarized affidavit template, a list of county offices, and a name I recognized, an old notary we used in the days when a signature still meant you would stand by your word, even if asked at dawn. The notary had put his stamp on clean things and on questionable things. I trusted him to fear the right people at the right time. "Breakfast?" Leo asked. "Victory," I said. "Later." We stepped out into the morning together. The house watched us go. I did not look back. Looking back turns thieves into monuments. On the gravel driveway, the cold air bit at my ankles, exposed by shoes. I had chosen not for their comfort, but for the authoritative sound they would make on courthouse floors. Leo opened the SUV door. Buster hopped in without needing permission. I slid into the passenger seat and rested my hand on the center console where, years ago, I had rested my hand on my wife's as she drove us to meetings that would build a life worth stealing. Leo started the engine. The gates parted. The city beyond waited, filled with small men who believed that forms determined reality, and one man who knew better. He glanced at me, that almost smile threatening to appear again. "Resurrection papers first," he said. "Then the bank," I replied. "Then the man who used the word problem to describe a human being." He nodded. "And then," I said, fastening my seatbelt like I was securing a weapon, "we choose a room full of donors, and we let the truth do what it does when it is finally handed a microphone." The SUV rolled forward. The sunlight cut a sharp blade across the hood. In my lap, Buster licked the old scar on my wrist, and I let him, because scars deserve to have witnesses. My son thought he was the author of this story. He forgot that the dead can write the endings when they decide to get up. "Name back," I said, as much to the road as to him. "And him, gone." "Both," he confirmed. "Both," I repeated, and watched the mansion shrink in the side mirror until it became nothing more than a problem for later. The morning after my return to the house, I rose with the discipline of someone who has survived for a long time without the need for clocks. The light was thin, a winter blade carving its way through the gauze curtains. Buster stood at the door, his tail twitching, as if he too understood that we were not here to rest. Today was about resurrection, not the sentimental kind that priests mutter about at gravesides, but the bureaucratic kind. The kind of resurrection that lives in sealed records and signed affidavits, a resurrection that transforms the word deceased into dangerous. Leo was waiting in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, a mug of coffee in his hand. He had the look of a man rehearsing competence in the mirror. His tie was loose, but his eyes were sharp. "The county office opens in an hour," he said. "I've already arranged an appointment. A discreet clerk, an old friend of my mother's. He'll handle the intake without raising any alarms." I set Buster's bowl on the floor and watched him lap up water as if it were currency. "Good. We'll need more than discretion. We'll need a trail so clean it looks like it was never scrubbed at all." He nodded, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were affidavits, biometric requisitions, and a draft petition for the correction of vital records. I skimmed the documents, noting every instance where my forged death had been signed into history. The certificate, the cremation permit, the estate filings. Each document was a weapon one my son had pointed at me, and one I would now aim directly back at him. "I want to see the notary first," I said. "The one who stamped my forged signature." "He's nervous," Leo replied. "I called him last night. He remembered you. Said you had a way of making men do things without saying very much. Then he'll remember what happens when men forget their place." We drove downtown. The county building was a brutalist slab of concrete that pretended to be important. I walked through its doors as if I owned the marble beneath my shoes. People parted for me, the way they do for men who look like they already know the ending of the story. The clerk's desk was buried under a mountain of files, but he straightened up the moment he saw me. He must have recognized my name, though on his records it belonged to a ghost. His hands trembled slightly as he offered me a seat. "Mr. Hart?" he asked, his voice pitched low. "Alive," I said flatly, "and very much aware of the crime committed in my absence." Leo handled the legal choreography, presenting the biometric data, photo IDs, and affidavits sworn by him as next of kin. I simply sat there, my spine unyielding, my eyes fixed on the clerk until beads of sweat formed at his temples. "This will take some time," he murmured. "We'll need to verify the physician's attestation." "Do that," I said. "And when you call him, tell him I'd like to shake the hand that certified my death without ever having touched my body. We'll see how steady it is then." The clerk swallowed hard and began typing much faster. From there we paid a visit to the notary. He lived in a faded apartment building with Venetian blinds that snapped shut the moment he recognized me through the peephole. But Leo had already wedged his foot in the door. I stepped inside, uninvited, with Buster patting at my heel. He was older now. His hair had gone thin, and his hands were shaking as he fumbled for a cigarette. "I didn't want to," he stammered. "He said it was urgent. He said it was what you wanted." "Vincent," I finished for him. "And you believed him?" I saw the paperwork. The law firm vouched for it. They said you were gone." I smiled thinly. "You, of all people, should know that a signature doesn't make a death." His eyes darted from me to Leo, then back to me. "What do you want from me?" "The truth, signed, sealed, and stamped." He hesitated until I reached into my satchel and pulled out the forged affidavit, the one bearing the crooked imitation of my own hand. "This," I said, holding it up close to his face. "You will tell the court who really signed it. You will admit that you never saw me. You will admit that you took money to commit fraud." He looked at the paper as if it were a lit fuse. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "All right," he whispered. "All right." He signed the statement Leo had prepared, his hand trembling so violently that the ink blotted. I watched, unblinking, until the seal clicked shut. When we left, Leo asked, "Do you think he'll hold?" "He'll hold," I said. "Fear is more permanent than loyalty." That afternoon, we walked into the private bank where my accounts had once lived. The manager, a slick man with a smile that was far too wide, blinked at me as if he'd seen a ghost, which of course he had. "Mr. Hart, this is unexpected." "Resurrection tends to be," I said. "Now, open my file." He stammered about protocols, authorizations, signatures. I leaned forward across his polished desk, letting my voice cut through the air. "You will either correct your ledger, or you will explain to a judge why a dead man is still drawing breath in your lobby." His hand shook as he keyed in the access codes. My account balances flashed on the screen. 0. All of it drained into Vincent's shell corporations, but the trail remained. Every transfer was coded. Every date was stamped. I tapped the screen. "Print it, all of it. Then lock the system. From this moment on, every penny that is moved constitutes obstruction of justice." He printed. I gathered the stack of papers, still warm from the machine. They felt like bones in my hands, proof that something that was once alive had been stripped, catalogued, and buried. By dusk, we had the affidavits, the biometric confirmations, the notarized reversals, and the bank records stacked neatly in Leo's briefcase. He drove us back to the mansion, his jaw set like a man learning the taste of iron. "You don't flinch," he said finally. "Most people seeing their own death certificate, their money stolen, their entire life erased, they'd crumble. You don't even blink." "Blinking," I said, staring out at the city lights, "is for people who believe that tears can fix a ledger. I don't. I only believe in precision. And tomorrow, Vincent will learn that his father has risen, not to embrace him, but to bury him properly this time." Buster shifted in the back seat, letting out a sigh as if he understood completely. Leo glanced at me, a moment of hesitation in his eyes. What if he tries to make amends, to settle this quietly? I laughed once, a sound as sharp as breaking glass. Then he will discover that resurrection is not about mercy, it's about war. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was time to step out of the shadows and let Vincent see me. Not in secret, not as a whispered rumor, but in full view. The living ghost at his gala. I dressed for war, a black suit tailored to the inch, a silver tie pin at my throat, my hair perfectly combed. Not mourning clothes, but an executioner's attire. Buster watched from the bed as I fastened the cuffs on my shirt, the links clicking into place like the cocking of a hammer. He tilted his head, as if to ask if this was my armor. It was. Leo met me in the hall, his eyes widening just slightly. "You look alive," I cut in. "That's the point." The gala was being held at the City Museum, a glittering parasite of glass and steel. I had walked its halls decades ago when I still believed in art as a form of legacy. Tonight, it would host Vincent's latest masquerade, another charity event designed to launder his greed into applause. We arrived late, by design. The red carpet was a frenzy of camera flashes. Journalists were calling Vincent's name as he posed in a tuxedo that was too new, with a diamond watch that was too bright. He smiled that manufactured smile, his teeth flashing as if nothing in his world had ever seen a shadow. And then I stepped out of the car. A ripple of gasps went through the crowd. Cameras swiveled in my direction. A murmur surged through the press line like a wave breaking against rocks. For a moment, no one knew whether to gasp in horror or to capture the moment in a flash of light. The whispers began. "Isn't he dead? That's him. My God, it's him." Vincent froze mid-pose, His smile faltered. Our eyes met across the flood of flashing lights. He went pale beneath his carefully maintained tan, but he didn't move. Predators don't run in public. I didn't speak a word. I simply walked past him, my chin held high, with Buster trotting at my side on a silver leash. The cameras captured the image. The sun glowing with stolen glamour. The father resurrected, as silent as judgment itself. Inside, the gala glittered with crystal and falseness. Donors clinked their glasses, blissfully unaware that their money was stitched into a fabric of fraud. I moved among them, like a king inspecting his courtiers. Faces turned toward me, and whispers chased me through the room. I approached the largest donor, a defense contractor with slicked-back hair and a gleaming Rolex. He extended a polite hand, confusion etched across his face. "Mr. Hart, we were told." "You were told many things," I interrupted. "Not one of them was true. But I'll give you one truth." I slipped a slim folder into his hand. "This is how your donations have been diverted into shell accounts, personal real estate, and jet fuel. It's not charity, it's theft." His face darkened as he skimmed the documents. This is serious indeed. And you will have to decide whether you want to keep feeding him or whether you want to cut the vein he drinks from. Choose carefully." He excused himself, already dialing a number on his phone. I didn't seek out Vincent. I didn't need to. Every step I took was a knife pressed against his throat. He tried to smile, tried to laugh a little too loudly at someone's joke, but his eyes followed me like a shadow that knew it was about to be burned away by the light. Leo remained at my shoulder, a silent presence, not for protection. I didn't need protection. I needed a witness. The evening wound down, the speeches faltering as everyone's attention drifted to me. Finally, Vincent attempted to reclaim the stage. He clinked a glass, forced a laugh, and began his well-rehearsed monologue about legacy and charity. I didn't interrupt. I simply stood at the edge of the crowd where the cameras could see me, my face cold and unyielding. Every donor in the room turned to look at me instead of him. His words died in his throat. For the first time in his life, Vincent had no audience. When the gala ended, I slipped out without a word. Outside, the cold air felt like triumph. Leo walked beside me, shaking his head. "You said nothing, and yet you said everything." "That's the advantage of resurrection," I murmured. "You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to appear." That night, as we returned to the mansion, I poured myself a glass of water and stared at my altered portrait on the wall. The forger had tried to soften me, to erase my edges. But tonight, the world had seen the truth. The edges were back, and they were as sharp as ever. I raised my glass in a silent toast to faces that cannot be rewritten. Buster wagged his tail once, as if in agreement. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Money leaves a trail, even when bodies don't. That's the lesson I repeated to myself the morning after the gala, standing in the kitchen of the mansion that had once been mine. The smell of coffee was sharp and bitter in the air. Buster lay at my feet, his paws twitching in his sleep, dreaming of a chase he would never lose. Across the island, Leo sat with his laptop open, the screen glowing blue in the dim morning light. The numbers reflected in his eyes made him look like a man possessed, not by greed, but by a righteous fury. "He's built 3 nodes," he said, his voice clipped. "The Foundation, Hart Meridian Partners, and a Cayman Islands account. They all funnel into each other like veins into a heart. Except this heart doesn't pump for charity. It pumps for him." I leaned against the counter, the silver tie pin cool against my throat. "And if we cut the veins, he bleeds." I smiled thinly. "Then, sharpen the knife." The plan unfolded with surgical precision. Leo's forensic accountant, a man with the complexion of a ghost and the hands of a concert pianist, met us in the study. He spread spreadsheets across the desk like maps of a battlefield. "Here," he said, tapping a column with a manicured finger. "The consulting firm invoices. They're identical, month after month. Rounded figures, no itemized breakdown. It's classic laundering. And here," I added, pointing to another column, "is the donor-advised fund. Large contributions come in, small disbursements go out. The rest disappears offshore." The accountant looked at me, startled. "You understand this?" I fixed him with a stare that could have peeled paint from the walls. I was married to a woman who built empires out of contracts. I signed every single page. Do not insult me by assuming I can't recognize theft just because it's wearing a tuxedo. He flushed and nodded quickly. By mid-morning, we had all the documentation compiled. Fraudulent invoices, duplicate wire transfers, shell corporations all registered to the same post office box. It was a latticework of pure arrogance. Vincent never believed that anyone would dare to question him. That arrogance would be his undoing. Leo leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "We could go straight to the regulators. Freeze everything right now." "Too fast," I said. "A shock makes headlines, but I want something that endures. We cut him off slowly. We freeze one account and let him scramble to cover the loss. When he diverts funds from another account, we freeze that one too. He'll be clawing at shadows until he tears himself apart." He studied me for a long moment. "You're not just after justice, are you?" "No," I said simply. "I'm after annihilation." Our first move was the injunction. We filed it ex parte, which meant Vincent wouldn't even know about it until the judge's stamp was dry. The documents went in under seal, the court clerk's eyes widening slightly as she recognized my name, alive, resurrected, and undeniable. By the time we left the courthouse, the order was already in motion. The Heart Meridian Partners accounts were frozen, pending review. Vincent would discover it soon enough, probably when his credit card was declined at some over-polished boutique. I almost wished I could see his face. Almost. But the second move was even better. That afternoon, I walked into the Foundation's main office with Buster at my side. The receptionist, a young woman, barely old enough to rent a car, looked up, startled, as I took a seat in the lobby. "I'm here for Vincent," I said. She stammered. He's not in today." "Of course not," I replied smoothly. "But I'll wait." And I did. For exactly 11 minutes, by the clock on the wall. I sat perfectly still. Buster curled at my feet, while employees peeked nervously from behind the glass walls of their offices. They whispered to each other, phones in hand, doubtless calling Vincent to report the resurrection sitting in his lobby. At precisely the 11-minute mark, I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and left without another word. It was never about seeing him. It was about making him feel me. Back at the mansion, Leo paced the study, his phone buzzing with updates. "The Cayman account is next." The accountant traced the transfers to a registered agent. "If we subpoena him, it'll take months." He hesitated. "But what?" I pressed. "There's another way. A contact of mine, offshore intelligence. It's not strictly legal." I took a sip of my scotch, savoring the burn. Neither was burying me alive. Make the call. By evening, we had the Cayman records. Numbered accounts linked to Vincent's foundation. Transfers disguised as consulting fees, millions of dollars siphoned away. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. I looked at the pages spread across the desk and felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not grief, but the cold, clean satisfaction of accuracy. He thought signatures could erase me, I murmured. But signatures leave ink, and ink never really dries. Leo looked at me, something akin to awe in his eyes. "You don't stop, do you?" "Stopping is for the dead," I said, "and I refuse to die twice." That night, as I lay in the guest suite, I replayed the day's moves in my mind. The injunction, the visit to the lobby, the Cayman records, each one a thread pulled from the tapestry of Vincent's empire. Soon it would unravel completely. Buster snored softly at my side. I stroked his fur and whispered, "We're cutting the arteries, my boy. Soon there will be nothing left for him to pump." And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to close my eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring not survival, but conquest. Revenge is not always about what you find. Sometimes it's about who finds you. The call came just after midnight. A burner phone Leo had given me buzzed on the nightstand. I answered without hesitation. A man's voice, rough with cigarettes, came through the line. "Mr. Hart, your son hired me once. He didn't pay what he owed." I sat up, my back straight. "Go on. I have information. Records. Proof. Things he thinks are gone for good. They're not." "Where?" "Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow. Church basement. 3rd and Main." He hung up before I could reply. I set the phone down carefully. Buster raised his head, his ears twitching, as if he too sensed the shift in the air. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "we meet a ghost." The church basement smelled of dust and forgotten hymnals. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like a bad conscience. The fixer sat at a folding table, his hands clasped, his eyes darting around the room. He looked like a man who had lived too long in the shadows, his skin sallow, his hair greasy. But his hands were steady when he slid a folder across the table. "Ledger," he said simply. I opened it. Inside were phone records, invoices, coded notes, and 2 audio recordings. The sound was grainy and muffled, but the voice was unmistakably Vincent's, ordering payments, discussing loose ends. And then I saw one note that froze the air around me. "Boat night." The same phrase Leo had found in the investigator's files. I closed the folder and looked at the fixer. "Why now?" "Because he cheated me," he spat. "Because he thinks he can walk over anyone. And because you're the only one he fears." I leaned forward, my voice soft and lethal. "You are going to sign a statement, sworn and sealed. And if you even think about running, remember this. Vincent may have buried me once, but I dug myself out. What do you think I'd do to a rat?" His eyes widened, but he nodded quickly. "I'll sign." Outside, Leo waited in the car. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, his jaw tightening when he saw a photograph of a blood-stained watch that was marked as evidence. "My mother's," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "And now, it's proof." He looked at me, pain and fury colliding in his eyes. "He killed her. He ordered her killed," I corrected. "And now we have the voice to prove it." That night, I sent Vincent a message from an untraceable account. One word, nothing more. Boat. I imagined his face as he read it, the panic, the frantic scramble, the chilling knowledge that his ghosts were rising, one by one. 2 days later, the fixer led us to a warehouse on the edge of town. Inside, hidden beneath rotting tarps, was a safe. He handed me the combination, his fingers trembling. The heavy door groaned open. Inside were contracts, SIM cards, more burner phones, and at the bottom, wrapped in a rag, was the watch. Leo reached for it with a trembling hand, then stopped. "It smells like blood," he whispered. "It is blood," I said. "And now, it's evidence." We returned to the mansion, the safe's contents spread across the study table. The artifacts looked like relics recovered from a tomb. Vincent's tomb. Leo stared at the watch in silence. Finally, he looked up. "What do we do now?" "We weaponize the truth," I said, piece by piece, in public and in private, until he has nowhere left to stand. I slid one of the recordings into a player. Vincent's voice filled the room, cold and clipped. "Make sure the boat doesn't come back." She was asking too many questions. Leo closed his eyes, his fists clenched. "That's it. That's him." "Yes," I murmured. "And soon the entire world will hear it too." That night, as I walked Buster through the silent halls, I felt no pity, no hesitation. I felt only precision. Vincent thought he could bury me. Instead, he had resurrected something far worse than his father. He had resurrected his judge. Revenge ripens slowly. By the time it's ready to be picked, the air itself changes. You can smell it before you can see it. The morning of the boardroom meeting smelled like iron cold, metallic, and unforgiving. I woke before dawn, slipped into a gray suit the color of a gathering storm, and combed my hair into a style that tolerated no rebellion. Buster paced beside me, restless, as if he too could sense the atmosphere tightening. Leo was waiting downstairs, phone in hand, his eyes sharp. "The donors are ready," he said. "So are the investigator and the reporter." "Good," I murmured. "Let's starve him of his oxygen." The Foundation's headquarters was a shrine to vanity. Glass walls, white marble floors polished to a blinding sheen, and art pieces meant to impress people who confused price with value. My name had once been etched into the brass plate by the entrance. Now, it bore only Hart Family Foundation. No first name, no history. My son had stripped away even that. We walked into the lobby, Buster trotting obediently at my heel. The receptionist nearly dropped her tablet when she saw me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Conference room," I said coolly. "Tell Vincent his ghost has arrived." The boardroom smelled of expensive coffee and cheap nerves. Around the glossy mahogany table sat two of the major donors. The defense contractor I had already poisoned with evidence at the gala, and a venture capitalist with hands that were too smooth for a man who claimed to build things. Both of them looked at me with a mixture of shock and recognition. Beside them sat the state investigator, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that measured everything. Next to her, a reporter scribbled notes into a leather-bound book, his eyes flicking between us as if he already sensed a story that would shred careers. Vincent swept in 5 minutes late. He wore a crimson dinner jacket and a diamond watch, as if dressing more loudly could somehow smother his fear. His eyes landed on me, and for the briefest flicker, his mask cracked. But he recovered, smiling wide as if we were at brunch instead of at war. "Father," he purred. "How dramatic." "Alive," I corrected. "And that's the drama, isn't it?" The donors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The investigator cleared her throat. "Shall we begin?" Leo opened a folder and began sliding documents across the table. Fraudulent invoices, duplicate wire transfers, offshore account statements. Each page was another nail being hammered into Vincent's coffin. The defense contractor frowned, flipping through the sheets. These are our donations. Redirected." Vincent laughed lightly, but the pitch was too high. "Ridiculous. This is all fabricated." I leaned forward, letting my voice cut through the air. "Then why do the invoices bear the signature of your Shell Corporation's secretary? Why do the transfers trace directly back to your Montecito account? And why is your father, who you declared legally dead, walking into this room alive to present them?" The reporter's pen scratched furiously against the paper. The investigator slid a subpoena across the table. "We'll be needing all communications and donor accounting records. Effective immediately." Vincent's smile finally faltered. "This is an ambush." "No," I said softly. "This is the air leaving the room. Feel it. He tried to use his charm. He spoke of legacy, of his grief, of how he had only wanted to honor me by carrying on my work. He let his voice tremble at all the right moments, but it was a wasted performance. The donors were no longer his. The contractor closed the folder and looked at him with undisguised disgust. "We're pulling our funding. Effective now." The venture capitalist nodded, his smooth hands now trembling slightly. "I can't afford this stain. We're out." The reporter asked one final question. "Mr. Hart, what is it that you want now?" I looked directly at Vincent, savoring the heavy silence that hung in the air before I delivered my answer. Everything he stole. And then his breath. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Vincent snapped at his assistants, barked at lawyers on his phone, desperately trying to spin a narrative that no one believed anymore. I didn't raise my voice once. Silence is the sharpest weapon when the guilty are already drowning. As we left the building, Leo exhaled slowly. "He's unraveling." "No," I corrected. "He's suffocating. There's a difference. Suffocation is slower, more deliberate. He'll claw for air until his nails break. And that's when we press harder." Buster barked once, a sharp, final sound. Yes, I thought. The air is already leaving him. The night of the benefit arrived like a storm pretending to be calm. The museum glowed under the spotlights, its massive glass atrium towering like a cathedral built for liars. Inside, donors in tuxedos and evening gowns sipped champagne, laughing the brittle laughter of people who want to be photographed looking generous. This was Vincent's kingdom, and tonight I would shatter it. I arrived early with Leo, the investigator, the donors who had flipped to our side, and the fixer, who was tucked away under protection like a loaded gun. We moved quietly through the service corridors, positioning ourselves where the reveal would hit with the hardest impact. The auction began. Glittering items were paraded across the screens. Art, jewelry, exclusive experiences packaged for the wealthy. Vincent stood on the stage, glowing under the lights, his crimson lips curved into a smile, as if he still owned the world. "Tonight," he declared, "we honor legacy, my father's legacy." I stepped out from the shadows, silent, and let the cameras find me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporter's camera flashed. Donors turned in their seats. Vincent's words faltered. For the first time, he looked small beneath the towering glass ceiling. Then, the projector behind him malfunctioned. The screen flickered, and up came a slide deck. Not art, not auction items, but line item invoices, charts of shell companies, and emails bearing his signature. The crowd erupted in murmurs. "Is this real? Those are his accounts. My God." Vincent spun around, his eyes wide, the color draining from his face. "This is a mistake! Sabotage!" I remained seated in the front row, sipping a glass of water as if nothing unusual were happening. "Truth," I said, my voice loud enough for the microphones to catch. "That's all it is." The investigator rose from her seat, her badge flashing in the light. "Vincent Hart, we have a warrant for your communications and financial records." The gasps deepened into a collective shock. Phones snapped photos. Vanessa staggered back, shaking his head. "No, no, this is a trick." Two federal marshals stepped through the main glass doors. He panicked. He bolted for the side stairwell, his dress shoes clattering against the stone floor. Leo rose instantly and followed, not to save him, but to watch what he would do when stripped of his audience. I walked slowly, deliberately, my own heels echoing in the massive glass atrium. The crowd parted around me, whispers rising like smoke. At the stairwell, I found him cornered, his mascara streaking, his silk gown wrinkled, his hands trembling as he pointed a finger at me. "You did this," he hissed. "You were supposed to stay dead." "I was supposed to stay erased," I corrected, "but paper burns. Flesh doesn't." His eyes darted to Leo, filled with desperation. He lunged at him, his hands clawing, trying to drag him down into his own fall. Buster snapped at his ankle, drawing blood. Vincent shrieked. The marshals arrived, cuffs at the ready. As they pulled him away, he screamed over his shoulder, "You'll never get the rest. You'll never find it." "The rest?" Leo asked, frowning. I stood at the base of the glass stairwell, watching him vanish into custody. My reflection stared back at me, in the towering panes of glass, sharp, merciless, and undeniable. "Yes," I murmured, "there's always a vault. And now, we're going to find it." The air in the stairwell was different. Thinner. It smelled of dust, steel, and panic. Panic has a scent. It's sharp, sour, almost metallic, like the edge of a coin rubbed between nervous fingers for too long. Vincent's dress shoes clattered against the concrete steps as he backed away, his tuxedo jacket snagging on the railing, his lipstick smeared, his hair falling loose from its immaculate styling. For the first time in his life, he looked less like my son and more like prey. Leo stood half a step behind me, his chest heaving from the chase. Buster growled low at my side, his body as taut as a bowstring. Vincent's eyes darted between us, calculating. "You think this is over?" he spat, his voice cracking. "You have no idea what I've built. I can buy and sell every judge in this city." "Judges," I said softly, taking one step forward. My heels echoed on the concrete like gunshots. "Judges are men. Men are flesh. And flesh bleeds, and money doesn't clean it up fast enough." His jaw tightened. He wanted to lunge, to tear me down with hands adorned with designer polish. But he didn't. He turned his gaze to Leo instead. "You," he hissed. "You ungrateful bastard. I raised you. I fed you. I gave you everything." Leo's face hardened into a mask of stone. "You murdered my mother." The words landed like a physical blow. He flinched, then forced a laugh that was brittle and false. "Murder? Don't be ridiculous. It was an accident. Boats sink all the time." "Then why did you call it a problem solved?" he snapped back. Vincent's mouth opened, then closed. A heavy silence fell in the stairwell, broken only by Buster's low growl. I stepped closer, until I could see the sweat beading at his temple. "You buried me on paper," I said. "You killed your wife on the water. How many corpses did you think you could stack before the floor gave way?" His eyes flashed with something primal. Not guilt, not regret, but survival. He lunged not at me, but at Leo. His hands clawed for his throat, diamonds glinting under the harsh stairwell light. I moved faster, years of suppressed rage sharpening my reflexes. I shoved Leo behind me as Buster snapped forward with lethal precision. His jaws clamped down on Vincent's ankle, tearing through fabric and skin alike. Vincent screamed, collapsing against the wall. Blood bloomed on the concrete, dark and spreading. The marshals burst through the stairwell door, guns drawn, their eyes wide. "Hands where we can see them." Vincent writhed on the floor, shrieking. "He set me up! My father set me up!" I folded my arms, my expression calm. "No, Vincent, you set yourself up. I'm just the mirror." The marshals cuffed him, his cries echoing off the walls like a hymn of defeat. As they dragged him past me, he twisted his head, his eyes burning with venom. "You'll never find the rest," he spat. "Never." His voice cracked on the last word, but the poison lingered. When the stairwell finally emptied, only silence remained. Leo leaned against the wall, pale. His hands trembled. Whether it was from rage or relief, I couldn't tell. He stared at the smear of blood on the floor, then at me. "The rest," he whispered. What did he mean? I looked at the stain, at the dark glisten on the concrete. He meant there's more. A vault, a deeper vein of rot that he thought was untouchable. Buster released a low, satisfied growl, then licked his muzzle. To him, blood is an honest language. I turned back to Leo, my voice cold and deliberate. We will find it. And when we do, his empire won't just collapse. It will burn. We left the stairwell together, the sound of Vincent's scream still echoing faintly, like a ghost that didn't know it was already dead. The safe smelled of mildew and iron. We found it in a storage unit 2 weeks later, hidden beneath crates labeled archives. Vincent had always been arrogant, but arrogance makes people sloppy. The fixer handed Leo the combination, his eyes flicking nervously toward me as if asking for absolution. I gave him none. The dial clicked, and the heavy door groaned open. Inside lay stacks of bearer bonds, ledgers, more burner phones, and envelopes fat with contracts. But at the very bottom was something heavier. A letter in Vincent's handwriting, sealed but never sent. I slid it out, broke the seal, and read it aloud, "To whom it may concern. My father's death was necessary. He was weak. He would have squandered everything. I did what had to be done." The words burned like acid. I folded the letter carefully and set it on top of the pile. "This," I said, "is his true inheritance." We delivered copies to 3 places at once: the court, the press, and the donor coalition. No backroom deals. I burned the leverage publicly so no one could ever use it against me again. The headlines hit within hours. Heir charged in fraud, murder conspiracy, donors withdrew, lawyers scrambled, the judge refused bail. Vincent's empire crumbled, not with a loud explosion, but with the steady, quiet decay of rot exposed to daylight. At the sentencing, I wore white a suit cut as sharp as a blade, a silver tie pin gleaming at my throat. I entered the courtroom with Buster at my heel and Leo by my side, and silence trailed behind me like a crown. Vincent sat at the defense table, shackled and gaunt. The crimson silk was gone, replaced by prison orange. He stared at me with eyes that were hollowed out by sleepless nights, but the venom was still there. The judge read the charges: fraud, conspiracy, falsification of records, accessory to manslaughter. The fixer's testimony sealed the coffin. The recordings were the nails. Before pronouncing the sentence, the judge asked if I wished to speak. I stood, my heels clicking against the tile floor. The courtroom hushed. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, "my son prefers closed rooms. Lies whispered behind doors, signatures forged in the shadows. I prefer the light. Let it burn him. Let it leave him with nothing but the truth." The judge nodded gravely and delivered the sentence. 30 years, without the possibility of parole. Vincent's scream split the courtroom. "You'll pay for this? You'll rot before I do?" I didn't flinch. I simply turned, took Leo's arm, and walked out. The mansion was mine again. The portraits that had softened my features were removed. The forgeries were burned. In their place now hang the original paintings, sharp, unyielding, and honest. Buster trots through the echoing halls as if he has always belonged here. Leo now manages the foundation, which has been stripped of its corruption and reshaped to fulfill its original mission. Donors have returned, drawn not by guilt, but by truth. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, I stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The air was still, heavy with the scent of roses. Leo joined me in silence. For a long time, we just watched the light fade. Finally, he spoke. "Do you feel finished?" I considered his question, the silence between us thick with meaning. "Revenge isn't about a feeling," I said at last. "It's about restoration, and I have restored everything, including myself." I lifted my glass in a silent toast. Buster barked once, a sharp and final sound. The house was silent again, but this time the silence was mine. And in that silence, I knew my son was gone, my legacy was secure, and the world would never again mistake me for dead. A story like this is a stark reminder that resilience is not just about surviving, but about reclaiming what was taken. If this journey of restoration moved you, share it with someone who might be fighting their own hidden battle. Follow our channel to hear more stories of strength against all odds, and join a community that understands that no one's story is ever truly over until they decide it is. Your strength is a story waiting to be told, and by listening to others, we often find the words for our own.